Welcome to Women in Leadership Talk, where you'll hear from successful women who are empowering other women with their stories of adversity, resiliency, and success. And here is your host, Vicki Bradley, founder and CEO of Women in Leadership Empowered.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. We have a guest with us that is looking for change makers. She wants to find all these change makers and really start to change the world. And so I'm excited to welcome Danaya Wilson from Denver, Colorado. So Danaya, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Vicki. Thanks for having me on.
Well, we're excited to learn more about you and hear about this new book. I think we're officially launching. I'm going to say the date only because I think that our podcast might be a little bit later before it goes live, but we're going to let the cat out of the bag a little bit early. So let me tell you a little bit about Danaya, and we've asked her to join us on our show today. She's the co-founder and CEO of BetterCertify. She has helped individuals, companies, industries navigate compliance and occupational safety education. And she has spent 17 years bringing revolutionary approach to regulatory training, which has changed a lot of outcomes for across different business sectors. And so I'm interested to learn more about that. But also your passion for women's empowerment. I think that's super important, happens to be my passion as well. So we're going to have lots to talk about today. And as I said, I really want to get into the book that you've just written and talk about the blueprint for lasting impact. So Danaya, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you.
So tell us a little bit about you. So there's usually a story that leads us to where we are today. So maybe just start there. How did you get here and why?
Yeah. My story is 100% one that was born out of not choice, but necessity. I graduated, my undergrad was in marketing in 2008 and actually 2007. But as I was looking on where I was going to work in the industry, I wanted to do marketing for Procter & Gamble. And if you know about anything in the economy in 2007, 2008, it was basically collapsing. Yes. Nobody was hiring for marketing positions. And so I was still living at home with my parents at that time. And I was really discouraged. This is what all this hard work has prepared me for, just kind of talking it out with my parents. And my dad was like, well, why don't you just temporarily work with us? We're starting up a hazardous material abatement firm. So their company was going to go in and remediate asbestos, lead, mold, all kinds of hazards. And he's like, just write my business plan. And I was like, okay, you know what? That will work temporarily. And I worked with him for 8 years. And then I started up my company, BetterCertify, which is within the same industry, but focusing really heavily on the education side, the certification side of the industry. And then I've been doing that for 10 years. So heavily male-dominated industry. And I've worked really hard to pave a way for not only myself, but one thing that I've really looked into is how do we get more women to do the same in industries like this.
Amazing. So kudos to mom and dad.
Yeah.
Giving you that little push and also helping you experience something that you probably would not have and look where that has brought you. And I think that's such an important lesson to be open, number one. Right. And when you were talking about, I was getting discouraged, I was home. I happen to have a new graduate living in my house who is experiencing very similar to what you went through. And it's hard sometimes to stay motivated. Right. And I said to him, like, just go do something, go volunteer, go do something that you can start to find some kind of a purpose. And, so I love that you did that. And then look, fast forward, 9 years later, 10 years later, no, more than that now. Gosh, I got almost 20 years, 15 years. How's my math?
I wish. I really wish, but the wrinkles are starting to show.
Oh, no. You look very young. You're perfect. Just the way you are. You're perfect. No, I think that's amazing. And so that impetus to, help companies be educated and understand why the importance of being certified properly, but also your passion for helping women to step into different types of roles and not shying away because it might be male dominated. So maybe talk to us about that a little bit. Why are you passionate about it?
First and foremost, I'm passionate because I am quite honestly tired of being the minority in the rooms that I'm in. I want more women to be in these rooms. I want more women broadly to be in leadership positions. Specifically within my organization, I see trends. For example, something that just happened today, I'm working with this colleague, and she's a new colleague, and she's on my leadership team, and she is at the same position as same hierarchy, same level as another male. And we're talking about job descriptions, and since it's a new position, we have to recreate and kind of shift. We're kind of flying this plane as we build it, and so we have to shift some job descriptions around. And one of the things that came out was she was kind of taking on a role that was an admin portion of ultimately the male's task. And I said, I see this on a regular basis happen with women leaders, that commonly they're doing a lot of those supportive, a lot of the arrangement, organizational tasks. And I'm going to step in here and say, no, this is something that needs to be assigned. The full task needs to be assigned to the male. And not solely because it has anything to do with gender, but just if we're looking at this from a lens of pure equality, then we need to assign tasks based off of what the ultimate objective is of the organization. So I think that's why I'm so passionate, is because there's a lot of gaps, and I don't want this to be the world that we pass on to our future generations. I want us to be able to say that we're proud of all of the work that we've done, and we have a true definition of equality where it's not based off of our gender, but off of our contributions.
Well said. So let's dissect that just a little bit. And this is curiosity. I deal with a lot of clients that have a similar situation, but I'd love to hear from you. What were your observations as to why she felt initially that she even needed to take on the administrative task?
Yeah, and we have a very open dialogue. And so she was like, after I said that, this happened over Slack, and she was like, and here I am expecting to do it. And I said, yeah, that's funny, right? And then she said, out of all the managers I have ever worked with, all of the women I've ever worked with, you're the first person that brought that, you shined the light on that fact. And I said, yeah, I think that makes me both happy and sad at the same time, right? So I think as women, when we come into an organization, we show up in ways that have been first shown to us when we're growing up. And so especially my generation, so I'm millennial technically, we're one of the first generations that our parents told us we could be anything at the same time, while our moms were mostly stay-at-home mothers. So in my case, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. My granny was a stay-at-home mom. Her mom was a stay-at-home mom. And so I am one of the first generations in our family that's going out there. And so as women, we come into this workplace not really having strong examples of what it looks like to lead, to negotiate, to stand up for ourselves. So is it okay for us to say, hey, you know what, that role really falls under your job title? I don't think we've been given the example. And I also think that we struggle with the authority to be able to say, this doesn't make sense, and I'm going to pave a way to change it. And I think that's really where my leadership can shine, because I've been in this male dominated industry for the vast majority of my career, actually for all of my career. And I've been able to really take a look at this from an outsider perspective. And I'm seeing these trends that maybe we all don't know even exist, but I'm certainly not going to perpetuate. I'm certainly not going to continue. And I'm going to train my team to be aware of it so that we, at least internally, aren't going to be continuing it.
I love what you just said. I think there's a number of ways we can approach this conversation because I see it, I hear it often, and sometimes it's even so nuanced with body language, right? Not even realizing that and sorry, ladies, but we give clues to say, oh, yeah, I'm the note taker, or oh, yeah, I'm going to be the one to go and get the coffee, or whatever example we might want to use. But our body language can actually sabotage the message that you're talking about, Danaya. And so I love how you brought that up, and I love how you highlight that amongst your team. And like, I remember a client I was working with several years ago, she was up for partnership, and she would even come to our sessions together, and she would have her notepad ready to take notes. And I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, what? I'm taking notes. And I went, no, you're not. Sit back, get your space, create a bigger space, make yourself big. Because if you're walking into these meetings as the note taker, that's how you're going to be perceived, not as a partner.
Yeah.
I said, you don't have to take a note of every single thing that's said. Recap it after, summarize it, ask questions, recap what you think you've heard. So we really worked on not only what her verbal content was, but what her body language, her nonverbal was saying. The other piece that you bring up that I think is so important is it not continuing. and often, sorry again, ladies, but sometimes women will take on the nuances of male characteristics or masculine attributes because that's the only way that they have been able to succeed. Yeah. Right. And so there's this unconscious male nuanced attributes that happens within organizations. And I love that you're calling that out to say, yeah, no, there's gaps. We need to change that. So maybe let's talk a little bit about what are the gaps that you've seen. You mentioned a couple, but maybe go a little bit deeper on what some of those gaps are.
Yeah, well, one of the biggest ones that I hear you kind of shine some light on is that definition of what it means to be masculine and feminine in a work environment. And I think we go so far as a society to attribute and to label specific leadership qualities, specific communication qualities, specific, nonverbal qualities to being masculine or feminine. And what's difficult with that is that when you're saying that these masculine traits are more successful or more beneficial in a business environment, you're putting women in a category that's, well, because you inherently don't have these and you're not able to be a man, then it's almost impossible for you to succeed. So what we can do from the ground up is no longer label characteristics with a gender and instead label them as traits. And I understand why we got here. There's a lot of research, and I think I just had it on my desk. Oh, no, different page. But anyway, there's a lot of research that shows that the reason why women operate one way in a work environment and men operate in a different way is because of how they've been, their child rearing traits.
Of course, yeah.
Which, okay, makes sense. But the simple non-labeling of these traits and just saying this works in this context is better than continuing to perpetuate this bias that really ends up hurting women.
Well, that I again, you're absolutely right. There's a number of things that we're not even conscious of. And like yourself, I was just doing some research a couple of weeks ago, and it was talking about how most organizations believe they're gender neutral and that they're not putting labels on. But the reality of it is, when you start to dig into even simple things like contracts, agreements, and I'm talking even supplier agreements, not just even your employment agreements, evaluations, all of those things tend to have more of a male nuanced spin to them. Yeah. And it becomes part of our everyday norm. So we don't then question it, right? Like, how is that lending more to, even when somebody does a job post, right? Mm-hmm. Is language more reflective of a more masculine attributes than neutralized traits,
Yeah.
right? And that's, I mean, I think it's going to take us a little while to get there, but when you're doing things like you're doing, like I'm doing, to open up conversations, to educate, to help women understand, no, speak up for yourself, or these
Mhm.
habits are making you not come across as an equal, then helping them to change those behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I get a lot of questions about, well, how can men be a part of women's empowerment?
Mhm.
And I have, for a while there, I kind of just avoided it, like, because I didn't want to put one half of our society into a category, and say, well, this is what they can do. What what I'm now really coming to is that I don't think that they need to be as present as we're trying to make them be. So, women's empowerment and what we're doing on a broader level doesn't necessarily have to do with men, and it has to do with women. And so, I think like the role for men really comes down to allowing, stepping aside, and giving the women the autonomy and the authority to be able to dictate what's best for women. And I think that in the nicest possible way of saying, like, let us do this, we got this, more women in leadership positions equals more equity for women. Let us take over. It's fine.
Well, I think I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate to that, because I, like you, like my company is Women in Leadership Empowered. And so I am very focused on how do we empower women to have their voice, to really stand up and ask for what they want, need, desire. But like you, I've had a lot of men coming to me, and now I'm coaching a lot more men on how to be a better ally. And part of that is simply understanding how to sponsor, how to advocate. And the reality of it is, our world is made up of 51%, 49%. And so we do need each other to be successful. And so there's a lot of really great men who are championing women and um, promoting women and sponsoring them. And I think that's where the difference becomes. I think women, we have been very clear for years now that we won't tolerate the harassment or the belittling. Like we're moving past that stage, but it's how do we harmonize versus pitting one against the other,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think we can make a lot more inroads when we're able to do that. And I also think about women who show up in these leadership roles with very masculine attributes. Um, I spent many, many years leading, a variety of different corporations. And I can assure you, I definitely was in my masculine attributes,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like, how do we, to me anyway, it's that feminine that is so important, and our world needs those attributes, the relationships, the empathy, that we've been missing so desperately in our working world.
Yeah. Well, then there's the more, and we have to kind of give ourselves a little bit of grace in the sense that, like, we show up masculine in a lot of cases because that's what's been shown to us.
Yeah.
And so, if we want future generations to be able to show up with traits that commonly are assigned as being feminine, then we need to have more individuals, more leaders that are, showing those traits on a regular basis. So, ones that are willing to lean into being vulnerable, ones that are willing to communicate on an open and transparent platform. Those are the kind of leadership skills that allow us all to feel a little bit more welcomed. And if we too, if we too also share that, um, I think we can have a little bit more harmony that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. 100% agree. 100%. And to your point earlier that you made, it is about traits, right? And that helps us to neutralize how any of us, regardless of gender, how we're showing up. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit here, but I'm so curious about your book. So, Change Makers Wanted, Your Blueprint for Lasting Impact and Ethical Change. Talk to us about this. What inspired it, and how long have you been working on it?
Yeah. I gave birth in the October of 2022 to a daughter, and a year after that, I was approached by Forbes, and they said, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I was like, "Well, actually, I've been thinking about this for a really long time." But I don't think I would have written the book that I ultimately written if it wasn't for my daughter and becoming a mother and looking at what the trajectory is of the world that she's going to inherit. And is she going to be dealing with the same, kind of tired nuances of break the glass ceiling or the broken corporate wrong? And I really took responsibility for this world, for this corporate environment. And I needed to be able to answer a few questions, like if we're going to get more women in leadership positions, what does that look like as a CEO? What does that look like in my own organization? And then also as an advocate, what does that look like on a broader societal landscape? And Changemakers Wanted, which ironically the original title was Sit At, and then it was going to be crossed out, Build the Table.
Oh,
Yes, it's going to be like we're no longer sitting at the table, we're building this proverbial table. But I ended up changing it because I realized that it was really difficult for me to shift the corporate landscape without the help of many other people. And so what it is it's kind of a call to action essentially for strong, empowered leaders that are looking at ways that they can pave a path for future generations of leaders. And one thing that I approach all things as a learner first most, and I really had questions with a lot of the women that I went to school with, and I have even friends that have doctorate degrees from prestigious colleges here, and they are no longer in the workforce. Over $100,000 in student loans, and kind of wanting to analyze what that really is without looking at just at the easy answer, what I thought it was. And so doing the research, which I detail in the book, I found two things: the childcare crisis, so access to affordable or even accessible care, and then flexibility in the workforce. And these two things are so crucial for us to be able to have more women in leadership positions, as well as to have more women continuing to have children and being able to make the decision between whether or not they want to go back to the workforce or if they want to stay home with their children.
yeah. So powerful. So powerful. And that is a question I get asked all the time. How do I do it, Vicki? Can I be a mom? Can I have my career? And then I'll add to, because this could be your second book, caring for parents, right?
Yep.
Because, like myself, I'm in that sandwich generation where I have kids, but I also have a parent that I'm having to care more for. And, she's early stages of Alzheimer's, and that's a full-time job.
Yeah.
And so it's those people say, how do you balance? And there's no such thing as balance. It's
survival,
but it's also prioritizing, right? Because there's those you're caring for, there's yourself, and then there's your career. And so really doing that work on what's your identity and how can you do both? Because clearly you're a very ambitious woman. You have a 2 soon to be 3-year-old at home who requires a lot of attention right now.
Yeah.
Right. And you're growing this beautiful business. So, and you're super passionate about empowering women and, changing the story so that your daughter has definitely not having to repeat the things that we're doing.
Yeah. One of the biggest things that can help with that is recognizing caretaking as something that is not a hobby. You don't just caretake for your aging parents because it's something you enjoy doing. You don't caretake for your children for your family because it's something, that's not the primary reason. There is, I'm sure, other reasons that you do enjoy. Like, I love taking care of my daughter. Don't get me wrong. But if we look at these things as actual economic tasks,
Mm-hmm.
then we can take it into a different category. And now we look at, okay, how does our society support this, as opposed to working against it? Because that's really what's happening right now. That's your private life. You do what you want to do on your private life, but what it affects so much of how we show up to our workplaces. And so we really need to start looking at that as a unilateral decision on how we're going to support our workers as humans, essentially.
Yeah. And it traditionally falls on women to be the ones who do that. And that's a very real opportunity, I will say, that we have, right? Because the reality of it is, women, we will work way harder to get everything done and to make sure everybody's okay. But there is a huge cost when we do that. And our workforce, not all, I mean, there's a lot of companies, I think, since COVID have recognized the fact that people can work from home and they can work remotely and be equally, if not more productive, but also they're happier because they can take care of and, nurture their children or their parents or whatever the situation might be.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a definite, I think, challenge we have and opportunity that we have. So I'm excited to hear in your book, you're talking about, some of these gaps. And so what's your ultimate goal from the book? Like, if you could, I'm sure you did your vision board of what the outcome's going to look like. What is that, Danaya? I just want to put it out to the universe.
No, I'm very much like that too. We have these meetings every week in BetterCertify, and we talk about our classes. And sometimes we have classes that are below enrollment, below minimums. And I'm like, we just need 2 more enrollments. And ironically, more often than not, it happens. I very much believe in manifestation. So with the book, there's 2. Right. So one thing I'm really big on supporting, and I'm wearing it today. It's this Spark pen.
Okay.
And so what this is basically something that we can wear in situations. I mean, I tried the other day, I had a t-shirt on and I had it on, like, okay, we need to calm down on the icon. But what it is it's a symbol of hope. It's a symbol of unity. And I think a lot of times we go into these situations, especially women, where we don't feel like we are welcome. We don't feel like there is a lot of other individuals that look like us, maybe have a background like us. And what this is more of a symbol of that hope and that unity and that collectiveness that we can bring into these work environments that we can wear, when we go to a conference. And so what this is this commitment to accepting people, this commitment to ethical leadership. I hope that the Spark takes off, and I hope that people see it as this essentially bat symbol of fairness and equality.
Nice.
The second thing that I really hope to happen is we as leaders are looking at what the actual outcomes are from our businesses, as opposed to how much time an individual is contributing to this. Are they working 40 plus hours? Or are they working Monday through Friday? Are they coming into an office space? All of these things, unless that's a number one, like let's say they're a restaurant worker and they have to show up for that space, they have to show up to the restaurant. But a lot of times that isn't necessary. And so us as leaders, we can change that narrative, and we can say, now we're going to look at what output metrics, what benchmarks are needed for our organization and in alignment with our organizational goals. And then that's how we're going to measure progress. That's how we're going to measure what are the output necessary from our human capital. And I don't think we're looking at that. We're looking at all of the other things. And we are so grateful, it's so amazing that we're living in a world today where we have things like AI and we have technology at our fingertips. We are so empowered with just the amount of resources that we have. but yet it almost feels like we're still in shackles, you know, and we're still showing up to this proverbial cage to do our work. And I don't think that's necessary any longer. I think we can complete more with less human input, and now we can invest that into better things like caretaking and being present in nature, you know,
Oh
living
my goodness.
holistically.
Yes, yes. And I love how you talked about the cage, because you're so right. And it's part of that is just from the industrial era, right? Of how you had to be present, you had to be there. And I was quite surprised so many organizations have kind of drawn the line in the sand and said, you have to come back or you're not going to have a job. And in a lot of cases, I mean, there's pros and cons to both, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's definitely a lot of synergy and creativity that happens when you have that collective in person. But it doesn't have to be the all or nothing. And that's what I'm hearing you say,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
It doesn't have to go that far, and you can have that flexibility. I have one client who decided during the pandemic, they were going to 4-day work weeks. And not only do they have 4-day work weeks, but they're not in the office, they're remote.
Mm.
And they decided as a collective that that was the best thing for the organization from a human capital perspective. And you also are able to get the expertise that you need because they're not tied to a geographic location.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's a lot of positives. So some of the companies that are mandating that, I think that's unfortunate, because there's a lot of women who have left, and you know, kind of because they feel like they don't have a choice now because they've had to pick. The bonus to that is there's also a lot of women like you and I who have gone out and created their own businesses and
Yeah.
are having an impact. So, yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one, Danaya.
Well, the biggest thing is like just you can't put a one size fits all on organizational structure. You have to be able to make a decision that's best for your corporate culture as well as the needs of your clients. So like we couldn't do a 4-day week because our clients are expecting service on a 5-day week. So there's certain things that we can do and there's certain things that we can't do. But the whole point is that we can, like that can statement is in there. And so what decision needs to be made is going to be made by all of the individuals as part of our organization. And I think that's the hope, is that we have a little bit more of a voice across to say. One thing I have to say, when we looked at what people were doing with that extra time that they weren't commuting,
Mhm.
they were spending time with their families. They were they were going to the gym on a regular basis. They were spending time more outdoors. You know, I think that sometimes we're acting like they were taking this time to like, you know, do something nefarious or not serving the greater good. And it's like, no, people were actually just being human.
Living.
Yeah.
Living.
And it's okay. Everything's fine. Mom.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great statement that you just made. And that's a great way for us to start to wrap up our call today. And you know what, I would say that's a challenge to our listeners. Like, you know, how is your company engaging, and how can you help your organization find that middle ground, find that flexibility, because you will have happier employees, you'll have happier customers, right? At the end of the day, you're serving others. And so, you know, do that from a place of genuine servitude, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just on that note, I'll share one comment. I remember one organization I was working with, they were saying, oh, they you know, they're a people centric organization and they trust their people. But then they turn around and they set a policy that is completely counterintuitive to that. And I remember speaking with the CEO and I'm like, okay, so I hear what you're saying, but what you're doing is actually complete opposite of that. And it was so fascinating because he was like, no, it's not. And I'm like, okay, but look at the policies you just put in place. And he went, oh my goodness, you're so right. And
Yeah.
I said, but we have to think about, how are we congruent? What are we doing that is counterproductive to what we say that we want to be?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, Danaya, you have a big night tonight because you have a book launch tonight. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So, okay, tell us where people can find your book. Tell us where people can find you if they have more questions or if they want to follow you. Where do they find you?
Yeah, so Changemakers Wanted, it publishes February 18th, so probably by this podcast, when it's out, it will be ready to go. You can find it at any of your booksellers. It's available for global shipping, so it's available anywhere. And then we also have an audiobook, so if you prefer to listen on Audible. And then my website is danayawilson.com. And I have a frequent Substack that really is the ground floor for this Changemaker Collective, which you can find out information on the website from there.
Amazing, amazing. And any social media channels that you're on?
I'm most active on Facebook, or I'm sorry, most active on LinkedIn, but I have Facebook and Instagram too. I have a team that's working with me on the Instagram. I feel like I am much older technology wise than I actually am. I say the Instagram, you know?
Yeah. No, I get it. I get it. I was the same. I've always been very active on LinkedIn, but the whole Instagram, Facebook thing has that's a little different. So I feel you on that.
I made it so hard. No longer it's just like posting. It's like stories and reels. And then I'm like, what is this? It's hard to be present.
Yeah. And it's so fast. Changes so very fast.
Maybe we need more flexibility.
Yes, yes, yes. There you go. There you go. That's a good practice for us. Thank you so much for joining us today. What a fantastic conversation. Thanks for all the work that you're doing. And I think you're also a frequent contributor to Forbes. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So audience, you can also check out Danaya on Forbes and some of the articles that she's writing. And I want to just take a moment and thank our audience for being here. Please do share this episode. You know, we're only here because of you guys. So please make sure that you do share this episode. Give us a like. Let us know how we're doing. Are these the conversations you want to hear more of? Tell us, let us know that. And again, you can find us on all the, as you know, you might chime in on Apple, but you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, all the major platforms. And listen, since we've been talking about leadership, we have a free quiz for you. So if you go onto the WIL Empowered website, that's 1L, Women in Leadership Empowered, we have a free leadership quiz, gives you a lot of great insight to how you're showing up in the world. So be sure to go on, take that quiz, get some insight as to how you show up as a leader. And there's always some little goodies that we send to you from that. So chime in for that as well. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Danaya, good luck tonight with your book launch. And thanks so much for joining us at the podcast today.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for WIL Talk, sponsored by Women in Leadership Empowered. To learn more about our programs, please visit www.wilempowered.com. We look forward to seeing you in our community.